Today we're servicing the automatic transmission in a 2011 Mazda 3 Sport sedan. We'll begin by lifting the front of the car on the jack stands, then we'll drain 3.5 quarts of transmission fluid, remove the pan, replace the filter, and then replace the 3.5 quarts that came out during the pan drop procedure.
But wait, there's more.
Who said that? Since draining the fluid only removes less than half of the fluid in the transmission, I'll show you how to use the car's own transmission pump to do a full flush of the transmission fluid. I'm David. You're watching Fixity Fix.
Fixity, fixity, fixity fix!
Step one is to support the car on jack stands after jacking it up. The Mazda 3, the 2011, and others in the same generation have a jack point in the middle and the crossbeam. I paint all the jack points on the bottoms of my cars just to make it easier to remember where they are. You can jack up the whole front end with a decent jack. The Mazda's so low to use this jack I have to roll it up on 2x6s to get it high enough for the jack to fit under it. And then I'm using double jack stands here because I'm going to be under it a while and applying some force to some bolts. I'll drop it down on the jack stands here in a moment. I'm going to remove this driver's side tire just to make it easier to get to the transmission in a moment. So we're going onto the car to remove the skid panel. I think the dog, if you can see him, is going to help. I've got a 10mm long socket loaded on the electric impact socket wrench with a 3-inch extension. I've got it already set to remove, just so I don't have to think about that under the car. 8mm hex bolt for the transmission drain. Some panel remover tools. You'll get a closer look at those in a moment. I believe that's all we need, so let's get this panel off. And a trusty magnetic bolt holder to keep up with everything. Plastic panel bolt pliers. These things will save a lot of time. Get into this panel clip here. Pull out the middle. Pop out the clip. Keep up with the two parts that come apart. It's held up with bolts, plastic clips, and apparently some leaves. Watson, the shop dog, is supervising the operation. And we're going under the car from the front driver's side. And here is the transmission, the shifter cable, and here's the transmission pan with 10mm bolts all around, torqued to 10 foot-pounds. The drain plug is here, and it is, I believe, an 8mm hex bolt with an aluminum crush washer. We're going to take off the pan after we drain the fluid. Drain pan underneath, break it loose. Move the somewhat expensive tool out of the way of the flow of transmission fluid. And here it comes. We'll just let it drain until it starts dripping just a little. Replaced the aluminum crush washer. It is the same size that you use when changing the oil. I recommend changing these every time. A lot of people don't. When you use a crush washer, the washer is designed to absorb the stress, the metal stress, rather than the threads of the pan or the bolt. So it's much better to have the washer be the sacrificial element in a system as expensive as a transmission. We're going to remove the pan, so I'm going to go ahead and replace the bolt and torque it to spec so we don't have to think about that later. Setting the torque wrench, 25 foot-pounds. Let's go a little tighter. It just feels like it needs to be closer to 30. Time to remove the transmission pan. Remove the drain pan. And now we remove the pan with a plastic putty knife or scraper. It's important not to use metal here because it will scratch the body of the transmission and cause leaks. I left a couple of loose bolts in, one here on the front and one here on the back, because the transmission pan's going to fall when we finally knock it free. It's going to take some work because Mazda uses RTV liquid gaskets. The plastic gasket scraper didn't do the trick, so I switched to hammering in furniture shims. Oh, that sounds good.
Yes, that's looking promising.
I mean, how many transmissions do you think people have to end up picking wood shards out of?
Oh, there you go. Here it comes.
Yep. I've got one
Exciting.
bolt in the front to hold the pan on. Okay, we're taking out this last bolt. Can I hand you this bolt and get you to put it in the magnetic bolt pan over there by the jack stand? Jack stand. Oh yeah, there we go. That's what did it.
Look at you. You even got it in the pan.
That's unusual for me. Usually I leave a puddle somewhere, like Watson the shop dog. Oh.
What was that?
There's those wood shards I was talking about. So here is the bottom part of the transmission with the transmission pan off. This is the residual of the liquid gasket installed at the factory. We are going to pop off this filter here. That's really a strainer that just feeds up into the transmission. First we need to remove this sensor. Just pulls out and hangs loose. And then this should be the same. We should get a little bit of transmission fluid coming out once we do that. Yep, there it is, all over my hand. And this old strainer is going in the trash. We'll put a new one in its place. So this is the new strainer for the transmission. This round part goes up into this hole in the transmission, just where the old one came out, and you just press it right in. It pops in. You'll hear a distinctive click. This sensor will go in. There's only one way it can go in, and that sticks in. Make sure it's in reasonably tight. It'll be held in by friction from the pan, and that is a new automatic transmission filter installed. So we have scraped the bottom of the transmission with this plastic scraper with plastic brushes to remove all of the cured RTV on the bottom of the transmission without harming the aluminum. Now that that's clean, I've also scraped all of the RTV off of the transmission pan, and then also cleaned all of the steel shavings from inside the transmission. It's a normal process for transmissions to have parts of the gearing adhere to this magnet. We're reinstalling it. It just adheres magnetically. And then instead of RTV, room temperature vulcanizing compound is what RTV stands for, we're going to use this gasket. We're going to make sure it fits exactly out of the car. And it's a good fit. I'm used to cork and silicone gaskets. I think this is a rubber gasket. Should be just fine, but I'll be checking underneath the car a few times after we get it all back together to make sure there are no leaks. So we're looking in the pan to make sure no debris has fallen in as we've moved it back under the car. We have our supply of transmission pan bolts here. We're going to start at the front and get the gasket lined up from beneath by poking through a couple of bolts. I think the gasket will hold the bolts in, so we can get a few started in each major turn. Want to make sure this is completely lined up between the pan and the transmission bottom. You can see where I wouldn't want to be fighting a flimsier quart gasket at this point. So I've just got them here at the major turning points of the gasket. And we'll carefully make sure everything is installed. There's no foreign objects inside the transmission or the pan. This will be our last chance to check it. The magnet is installed, and we grab a trusty rag, get the fluid off of the flange here just so it doesn't invite any deterioration of the gasket. A bolt on the back side. Finger tight. Alright, that's in. Line up one near the back of the transmission. Definitely don't want to cross thread any of these, so finger tight at first. Alright. We just take a gas or a socket extension. A little easier to screw these in. After I get these just not even snug, I need to go around the whole transmission with a light and make sure the gasket isn't bulging or missing on any of the visible edges. I also want to shine a light on the bottom of the transmission and make sure I can see through the gasket holes where the bolts are going to go to make sure it's present all the way around. We don't want to have to repeat this process. We use the inspection light all around the edge to make sure we can visualize a gasket. I'm going to go ahead and finger tighten everything where it looks correct.
Helps to turn it around the right way.
To an electric screwdriver here, and I have it set on the lowest torque setting so it just spins them into place. I'm going to get them not snug at all, but this will speed up the job a little. I'm stopping right before they touch metal, and then we'll use a torque wrench for the rest. Spec is 10, but I want to go a little tighter because I've got a rubber gasket on here. We start in the middle of the pan on the sides, torquing. Transmission pan is installed and torqued to 11 pounds-feet for all of the bolts. The drain pan plug is installed. And so we're ready to go up top and to add back in the 3.5 quarts that I measured that came out from the drain plug and then from dumping the pan and pulling the strainer. We're going to use a transmission funnel. We're going to pull the automatic transmission fluid dipstick, which is right here under the brake fluid reservoir. I'm going to pull this out, lay this to the side. Use the transmission funnel with the long edge down. We're going to put 3.5 quarts back in because that's what we took out. Idemetsu ATF automatic transmission fluid type M. It's compatible with type 5 or V, and the V is actually the Roman numeral 5. A lot of people get this confused with Dexron 5. It's not the same thing. It's going to take a while for this to work its way down into the transmission. Watch part 2 for the transmission flush procedures. If you found this video helpful, please click like or better yet, subscribe.